please, unless speaking. So today, October 6th, we will call the meeting to order at 9:03 a.m. Welcome, everyone. Good to see folks. For those who were not able to make our meeting in May, we welcomed a few new members. And then again today, we're welcoming Corey Matthew. Corey is with us as a new member today. So thank you for participating, and we look forward to having you on board. There's a busy agenda today, so I'm just going to have a few brief comments for this morning. I want to assure you that, while it's been a few months since we've met, the staff and committees have had a very busy summer. Abby continues to convene special focus committees to help inform the strategic planning that she's leading, and we heard about this past May, and we'll get a deeper dive in that coming up later in the agenda. Also later in the agenda, Senator Clarkson and I will update the board on the Oversight Committee work that has begun. And that strategic planning and Oversight Committee work are not being done in complete silos. There's many of the same individuals, departments, organizations that are participating in that. So it is being done with awareness of what's happening in the other process. And of course, the Oversight Committee work, we don't anticipate happening quickly. So we'll be keeping the board up to date on the progress that committee is making. I personally remain very excited about the charge of the committee, and this board has really helped shape sort of what's going to happen there with the many past years of participation. So, in my region, I'm really passionate about helping modernize the workforce system and across the state, not just in our area. But what we need to do is help employers have their future needs met, and we need to help upskill Vermonters and increase wages across the state. Not so long ago, a company investing in automation would often be seen as maybe hurting or having a negative impact on the workforce. And I think we need to try to change people's thinking on that and see it for what it is, which is really an opportunity, because companies are going to continue to have to do more with less. And those market forces are going to continue to really drive employers' choices. And we need to help them create more high wage, high growth jobs. And we need to ensure that folks' wages are increasing across the state while supporting them with a system that allows that to happen and strengthens both employee and employer. So I'm very optimistic these two processes, the strategic planning and the Oversight Committee, will help do that. We've made a lot of great progress already, this board and many others across the state. So today is a check-in on all that progress. And likely why many of you are here today is to hear about that progress. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the always entertaining, informative Matt Barowitz of the Vermont Department of Labor to present the data on how we're doing. Matt, are you ready?
I am. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I hope I can live up to the hype. Data sometimes lets people down in terms of excitement and fun, but we'll see what we got. As the chair mentioned, this is a jam-packed agenda full of a lot of fun things. So my time is short, so if you'll please allow me to just jump into this. I will have dual screen going, so if people have questions or chat, please let's hit those as we go through the presentation so that you don't lose track of your questions and keep the dialogue going and keep the agenda going. So I should be screen sharing now. Hopefully that's coming through. You all hopefully know me, and for the new people that don't, I am a state employee, but I am basically 100% federally funded, as the rest of my division is. There's one of me and one of my team in every state in the nation, plus Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, and Washington, D.C. We form the U.S. system. So it's the U.S. Department of Labor's support, particularly employment and training, makes it possible for me to be here today. And they encourage me to work with this very group and be a support. So if you have data questions, If you have research questions, please let us know. We're always interested in how we can support the work of this group. And Abby's been great to work with, as has the chair. So thank you for being on this board. I know you're all very busy, and I appreciate that you take time out of your day to focus on the needs of the Vermont workforce and the economic outcomes of the state. Little disclaimer, we're going to be talking about data. Hopefully I will not be sharing too many opinions. What I'm talking about is data, up and down, left and right. So where we left off, I spoke to you in April of last year and October last year, and I just wanted to, I re-looked at those to see where did we leave off. And, you know, at that time we were talking about population because we had just heard that, you know, we had 17,000 new Vermonters and the 2020 census was not yet complete, and it's unfortunately still not. So I'm bringing that sad news that a year later, the 2020 census is not all the way unraveled and unpacked all the way down to the state level that we need it to be so that we can properly calibrate all our statistical models. So it's going to be another, I hate to say it, but anywhere from another 6 to 9 months until the US Census Bureau gives all my partners everything they need at the Bureau of Labor Statistics to calibrate our statistical models. I'll show you a slide later which shows what the Bureau of Labor Statistics has done in the short run to help us fill some of that knowledge gap, because we know things have changed, particularly for us with our new population at 643,000. We've looked at this county data, and I think it's just important that we start here just to kind of reground ourselves of where population declines have been in these 3 counties, Essex, Caledonia, and Rutland. And for the 10-year prior to getting the new 2020 census, we really thought it was the entire 4 counties in the South, including Bennington, Windham, and Windsor. But actually, once the results were in, those 3 counties, Bennington, Windham, Windsor, did have positive population growth, which was a surprise. And I think a lot of people associate that with some of the pandemic relocation that occurred. And so there's still this question of, are those people going to stay? And, you know, that's the big $1 million question. My old boss used to say, give them 2 winters. If they're still here after 2 winters, maybe we'll keep them. So for a lot of people, they're coming up on their 2nd winter right now. And so we'll have to see what that means. As a quick, again, reminder, even though Chittenden County looks like a massive dark green at 7.5% increase over that 10-year period, that is still not even to the US level of population growth. The US, I think, was 7.8. So there's no county in Vermont, including Chittenden, that's growing as fast as the US population overall. But where we want to talk about and spend our time today is really what we know about the current labor market. And, you know, some of this data, there's no one data point. I've had many conversations over the years about, oh, we need one data point to show if the economy is healthy or not. And I'm like, ooh, that's going to be a tough one. And a lot of times people will look at the unemployment rate and say, oh, well, that'll tell us if the economy is doing well or not. And, you know, for some, maybe looking out the window and saying, you know what, we're at just about 2% unemployment, historic lows unemployment. This must be a great economic time. How many people in this room are going to raise their hand and look out the window and say, because we have 2% unemployment, we're going to consider this great economic times, right? There's something caught up, there's something gummed up in the works, and this is what we're going to explore a little bit more as we go forward, that doesn't feel like we're reaching our maximum economic potential, right? And this is the work of this board, is how do we grease those wheels? How do we figure out the hitching points to ensure that we are doing the best we can with our scarce resources? So from an unemployment standpoint, we're back to where we were pre-recession. In fact, we're actually at historical lows, and this series goes back to 1976. So we're creeping up on 50 years of economic history for the state of Vermont in this data series, and we're at the lows. And it's not just the statistical concept of being unemployed, it's also the people who are receiving unemployment insurance benefits. And that's a distinction that I'm always happy to go into, but they're separate populations. There's people who are unemployed, they don't have a job, but they're looking, maybe they just moved here, maybe they just graduated, but they're not eligible for unemployment insurance, right? That's a separate population, people who are eligible for unemployment insurance. And this is our claims data. So this is what the Bureau, the Department of Labor is working with. And you can see this is just a 5-year snapshot from the same week, for the last 6 years. Looking at the same week, a lot of seasonal patterns go on. So you always want to look at same weeks when it comes to claims data. But you can see, other than the anomaly that was 2020, when we had, the COVID cases, you can see the incoming initial claims, 184, is lower than it was in 2019 by nearly half. And the same thing for 2018. And continued claims. So once you file your initial claim, you go into the continued claims pool and you continue to receive benefits, assuming you're still eligible. We're just under 1,400 people collecting benefits. Prior to the pandemic, we were over 1,800. Usually we're around 2,000. And so again, from a claimant population standpoint, it's not like there is just this huge queue of people collecting unemployment insurance benefits not getting jobs, right? It's just like this population isn't here either. These are historic lows for as long as we can track them too. Commissioner Harrington has a question.
Thanks, Matt. Always interesting data. I was curious whether or not normally we track the average length of time someone collects benefits. Maybe you'll get into that on another slide. But if not, do you know what that has been looking like when you compare year over year?
Great question. And I haven't looked at it recently, but the last time I did, it was coming back down to lows or normals. What's funny about unemployment insurance benefits is there's definitely a pattern to it. So on average, you typically collect like 12 or 13 weeks, the average. And anyone in this room who's worked with data knows averages are highly subjective to the outliers, right? And this is what we know about this current economy the most, right? It's like we could put 100 people in a room and average them and come up with some number, but is that number meaningful if 10 of those people in the room have been unemployed for 50 weeks or longer, and 90 of them in the room are unemployed for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, right? And so even when we look at average duration, we really find it highly skewed by these long-term unemployed. The people are really having the difficult time becoming re-employed. That population of quote unquote long-term unemployed, switching now not from claimants, but to the definition, has been coming down. But that's where we saw the biggest, like, what do they call it, stickiness in the data is this population, like the number of unemployed was dropping fast, the number of long-term unemployed was not dropping as fast. And so I think that's where sometimes the data will kind of confuse us or have us maybe think make a wrong conclusion potentially if we didn't understand the population making it up. So as it stands right now, we're just over probably 12 or just under 13 weeks in terms of average, and that is low, but it's not outside the bounds of normal. So what this is all getting to, we've talked about the number of unemployed, we've talked about the people getting unemployment insurance, yes, hi, Sophia. Dustin giving a big shout out. It's great to have Sophia on the call. The Vermont labor force, right? This is the size of the people who have work or willing to work. And, you know, this is one of the rare days you'll ever see me put a non-zero indexed graph up. So I want to highlight that this index does not go down to zero. This is intentionally highlighted to show the ripples and the ups and downs. That's a key way to torpedo someone's analysis. If anyone's showing you a graph that doesn't go down to zero, ask them why they're doing that, because there's obviously a reason. I hate when people do that, and here I am. But so this graph starts at 310,000, but I want to highlight what's happened in Vermont labor force. We peaked in like 2010. You can see it at 359,000, just shy of 360. Since then, we had this big kind of walk down until about 2016, and all of a sudden a jump up. This is that artificial fix that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has installed in our data. They did a 3-year clawback and kind of what they call a wedge. They jammed in the new population data, but they only did it on a 3-year basis. And so this is what is going to be fascinating to see what comes out of the US Census Bureau's work, because here in Vermont, you know, the question is a valid one. Did we get 10 years of steady growth to get to 17,000 more people? Or was it something that happened in 18 or something that happened in 19 or something that happened in very early 2020 that really all of a sudden flipped the switch and turned how many people were in the state of Vermont? So as it stands right now, this wedge, that accounts for why there's such a bump between 2016 and 2017 in the labor force. So in essence, what I'm saying is those numbers from 2011 to 2016 have not been touched or influenced by the 2020 census results, which show we've had a larger population. That said, the big conclusion here, I'm saying we've had a population increase of 17,000 people, but the trajectory of this line has not changed. We have more people, fewer people in the labor force. And that trend has been accelerated in the last couple of years. And much of this, even though there's been a lot of research, a lot of discussion, even in this room, when I've met with you previously, when we've talked about individual populations, there was a lot of discussion about, oh, maybe it's parents, maybe it's heads of households or single or people with school-age children, or lots of different things. Ultimately, what the research is now pointing back to, now that we're two and a half years post the start of COVID pandemic economic recession, is demographics. And Vermont, as a leading edge of the country in terms of older than average population compared to the US, we're seeing that speed up. And we've had this conversation, right? The leading edge of the baby boomers turned 65 in 2011. That means the leading edge of the baby boomers turned 75 in 2021. I still have a problem believing that we're in 2021. It seems like some future fantasy year way off in the future. But here we are, 2021, and the leading edge of the baby boomers turned 75, and the labor force participation rate of that population is significantly lower. So even though I'm talking about increased population, I'm also talking about decreased labor force participation, and limited access to available labor in the form of the unemployed or the people who are claiming benefits. And how does this translate to our counties? I think you've seen this slide before. We're seeing that the labor force, now not talking population, instead we've seen that the labor force in every county has gone down. There was a peak year at some point in the past where every county, including Chittenden, peaked in labor force and has since come down. So even Chittenden County peaked in 2019 and is now down 7% from its 2019 levels. Many counties experienced double digits. Essex went all the way up to 21%, with Windham knocking right on its door at 20%, 19.8. Now, these are just statistics on a page, but if you think about people in the street, and we're talking about either in Essex or Windham County, and these are residence-based. So if you think these are people who live in Essex County, these are people who live in Windham County, that's like 1 out of every 5 people who used to be in the labor force is not in the labor force anymore. Those are big numbers. That's real life. That's like, you can start going down your house, the houses on your street, and saying 1 out of every 5 of these houses is not in the labor force anymore if it was. Making that assumption. And it starts changing your lens of how you look at your local community and the talent pool available or the people who are looking for work. But this is where rubber meets the road, labor demand and labor supply. And so we've talked about labor supply has been on the wane, at least recent. Labor demand has been on the upswing. And this is why 2% unemployment doesn't feel like a boom time for economic climate. Pre-pandemic, February 2020, we had 9,000 people statistically defined as unemployed. We were looking at 16,000 openings, which was high for Vermont at the time. That was a lot of openings for us. And we were getting about 7,000 quits a month, and which was about average. So this translated to 1 unemployed person for every 1.8 job openings. And in 2019 and in early 2020, we were talking about tight labor market conditions in the state of Vermont. Employers from almost 2015 on were already talking to us about how they couldn't fill positions, how they were looking for more people, how they were like, I'd be happy to add a second shift if I could just think that I would actually be able to fill the positions. So here we are, 2020, talking tight labor market conditions at a 1.8 ratio. Look where we are now. July 2022 is the most recent JOLTS data, which gives us the openings and quits. And we're seeing now we have 1 unemployed person for every 3.3 job openings. So this is one of those things where it's like, if we were tight labor market conditions before, we are even more tight labor market conditions. And this is an important time to pause, because again, these are numbers on a page. These are statistics that we're talking about. It is never easy to be a job seeker. I don't care if there's 10 postings for every 1 person looking for a job. It is never easy. And it always takes that special one-to-one match of an employer, hiring an employer, and the person with the right skills, attitude, abilities, and seeking the position that's being offered to match up. And those one-to-one ratios are very difficult to sometimes come by in the real world. So just because I'm talking about, this being a better time than most to be a job seeker, it does not mean that it's ever an easy time to be a job seeker. We need to remember these are people who have families, who have to put food on the table. So, I just want to highlight that. That's a big part of the work we do at the Department of Labor, is making sure individuals know the opportunities and are able to access those opportunities. But here we are, we're looking at 7,000 unemployed people with over 23, or around 23,000. This just came down from 26,000 in the prior months. We never crossed 20,000 openings until 2022, and we've done it several months in 2022, over 20,000 job openings. And the quits just jumped up in July too. They had come back down to about 8,000 or 9,000, so almost back to 2020 levels. But July jumped up again, so we got a rise in quits. And that could be people realizing that there's opportunities out there that would be better for them, right? So you can quit and then you take a new opportunity, and that is seen as a positive thing, economically speaking, because that person's doing right for themselves and moving on to a new opportunity. If they're quitting and leaving the labor market, then that's not necessarily a good economic outcome, unless it's for that person's benefit that they decided. But and yes, of course, Secretary Frenchie, you'll have a copy of the slides, and I just want to make sure I'm catching up with the comments. So Heather Boucher asks, when we say not in the labor force, does that mean employed in Vermont only? Think of the increase in remote work. We're going to talk about remote work in a second. And you are in the labor force if you are in Vermont working remotely. So you would be part of our Vermont labor force statistics.
Matt, this is Mike Stack. I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
I can.
Question, labor traditionally has been a lagging indicator. With the Fed stamping on the brakes here, how much of this do you think will resolve itself with what the Fed's doing to an overheated economy, or is this more secular?
That is a great question. I think it will, in this equation here where you see labor demand equal greater than labor supply, I think what it'll do will put downward pressure on labor demand. However, what I don't think it's going to do is much to help us on the labor supply front. So even if you have a lot of opportunities, or fewer than a lot, you're still going to have a challenge of getting people to fill the available opportunities because of demographics. I don't, for all the conversations I follow, I don't think there's been nearly enough discussion about demographics and the role it's playing in the economic boom and bust on a long-term, decades-long picture for the U.S. economy. You look at what drove economic growth, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It was women entering the labor force and the baby boomers entering the prime age of their working years. And they were just an incredible economic engine. And now, as women's labor force participation rate has plateaued, if not pulled back a little bit, and men's labor force participation has declined significantly, mostly due to demographics, we're starting to see the pains of that. That's a good question, and I think that's a lot to be determined, especially how it's, first and foremost, we need to see if inflation is going to behave for any long-term period of time, because ultimately you start getting people who can't make ends meet, right? So they have to, therefore it forces people in the labor force due to economic necessity, and those sometimes can be tough consequences. Question, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Matt. It's always a treat to hear you. And you always raise new questions. And I guess my question focusing on sectors of the economy, of the 23,000 job openings, do you have a notion of the job sectors there that breaks down into? Because I know if Dan French is interested, I know there are like roughly 1,000 teacher jobs open. Do we know job sectors for the 23,000?
Great question. As provided by our federal partners at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this number goes no farther. So it is 23,000 as a standalone level. However, Tori really nudged us along in the past to try and come up with Vermont estimates. They're super dirty, and we're still considering them experimental. So we have looked at trying to create Vermont-based estimates, but have not promoted or released anything on that. It's a good question. It is something we are exploring and trying to figure out how to add to. And I know Abby's going to be worried about time. So I'm moving along, and I'm almost done, Abby, so I'll be mindful. And to Tom's question, it's tough to say if we've seen anything easing in terms of labor market conditions in Vermont, because we're so seasonal, right? So we just get through the busy summer months, and now we're kind of entering the shoulder seasons. April and May, and then November are shoulder months for economic activity in Vermont. So it's going to be interesting to see how we transition into winter. And I think that'll be a big test, and we'll see what kind of, where we are at that. And so I haven't seen anything yet, and probably due to just the seasonality thing. So, okay. We've seen upward pressure on wages, and you can actually see that this line actually has a little bit of an increase around 2014, where it starts to increase, the pitch of the line starts going up, but then more so now in 2020. So this is, again, just highlighting competition for labor, increased competition for labor, labor's scarce, wages on the rise, and increasingly so. But here's where I wanted to get to, because I know we talk a lot about people in this conversation, and this group has particularly been interested in the outcomes of individuals. There's one thing I wanted to highlight, and this goes back to Heather Boucher's comment about remote work, because this is half the story. Where we're talking about wages are up, but it's locally due to decrease in labor supply. There's this whole second half of the equation, which is really just making this economic recovery very different from past ones. Here is, so the Vermont Department of Labor is the administrator of unemployment insurance laws. So by law, employers have to register for the Vermont Department of Labor if they have an employee in the state. If there's an employee-employer relationship in the state, they have to register with us, and they have to tell us what they're up to in loose terms. Administratively speaking, it's the best data out there. It's fantastic because they have to. They are required by law to comply with us. So here's what our business formation rates were: 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. You can see kind of like this stability. 400 or so, anywhere from 150 to 400 establishments added every year, 1% growth thereabouts. 2021, we saw a 6% or over 1,500 new establishments established. And here is where we get into remote work, because look at the three categories that made up the 1,500 new establishments. 1,000 of them were in professional business services, which could be broken down further into 800 in professional and technical services and 200 in administrative services. And then after the 1,000 in professional business services, there's only two other that had any meaningful number, which is 129 in information and 100 in financial activities. That gives you about 1,300. So there's only 200 establishments that are created in every other industry in the state of Vermont. These 1,300, there's something that jumps out to me immediately, which is all of these have the ability to telework. And when we look at these 1,300 new establishments, in total for these industries, it was a net increase of 2,500 jobs. There was already 8,000 businesses doing this type of work. So this 2,500 or 2,500 quote unquote new jobs to the Vermont economy was across these three entire industries, meaning we added 1,300 new establishments. We got about 2,500 new employees. These are, to me, about as clear as day will ever point to. These are either individuals moving to Vermont with jobs and establishing a new employer in the state of Vermont because they brought their job with them, or they're Vermonters taking advantage of the opportunities now available to them because employers know they can hire somebody to do their job anywhere in the world. And so there's now increased competition for certain sectors within the industry, for certain talents, for certain skills, that you are no longer competing. If you are in software design, you're no longer competing with who's down the road, for labor. It's who's across the globe. And now so many companies have proven they can work telework. It's not just software design. That's, you used to be the default go-to standard. Of course, they can work anywhere, but now it's project managers. Now it's sales. Now it's everything that related to design, anything related to almost administrative functions. Information is like publishing and desktop publishing. Professional business services, it could be economists, it could be engineers, it could be management consultants, it could be a lot of different things. And so here we have the second factor, that is expanded regional competition for labor due to technology. And again, wanting to reground ourselves in who we are and what we do here, recognizing that not everybody gets invited to this table. If you have the skills and abilities to sit at this table and get national, international wages for your talents, that's great news for you. But who doesn't get invited there? If you work in, with individuals, personal care, if you work in physical structures, maybe even construction, how does this all translate? And how is the economy bifurcating into those who have access to incredible opportunities and those who don't? And that's what we need to be mindful, I think, as the discussions go forward. So I am wrapping up. Our fourth version of the McClure brochure looks like this. We are working on number 5 right now. Very excited about that. And I do want to look at Kendall's quote here. As we try to understand our workforce gap, based on the last slide, would it be that 16,000 people? Oh, yeah. Yes, in a simplistic view, if you wanted to say, yeah, there's 23,000 job openings, we have 7,000 unemployed people. The difference is we're missing 16,000. The only caution I give with those is that it's a good metric because there's nothing wrong with it. However, it is possible those 7,000 unemployed are qualified for 0 of those 23,000 jobs. So, you know, depending on how you look at the gap, you could say we actually need 23,000. We just need the right 23,000. Plus, we need the right 7,000 jobs to fill for those people. So that's the only issue. You know, for when we talk about technology and things like that, sometimes there's a regional component. Sometimes it's a household limitations, like I need to work these hours. I need to work within this much of a travel corridor. Those type of things are where the real world troubles interfere. So that is me. And this is my time. And Abby, I want to make sure I get it back to you.
Great, thank you, Matt. All right, and if anyone has any follow-up questions for Matt, feel free to send me an email or send him an email. We'll distribute all of the slides after the meeting so you all can digest that information. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us individually. So next, we are going to have Kendall Smith speak regarding the governor's state strategic plan. Kendall.
Thank you, Abby. Good morning, everybody. So Matt set the stage really well in terms of what Governor Scott and the administration has been focused on, which is how can we close, I'm going to say that 16,000 to 23,000 gap between who is in our labor force and who we need in order to sustain ourselves. I know I probably don't even need to say this with the audience on this call, but it feels more acute right now, at least anecdotally to me. There, for example, in central Vermont, were 2 schools that were closed this week because they had too many teachers out and not enough subs. We're seeing a new normal on Main Street, right, with business hours and restaurant hours. We're seeing longer wait times for healthcare services. So this demographic pressure is really impacting a lot of areas of all of our lives, and again, what we can offer as a state. So I don't need to talk too much about how Governor Scott's been focused on making Vermont a great place to live and work. You've all heard it before. But right now, in terms of how do we do that, so like what specifically does the governor and the administration mean? We have a strategic plan, and we are in the basically the throes. I'm hopeful that we're getting near the final stretch. So what I'm going to show on the screen here in a second is to be considered a draft. I want to underscore that as draft, work in progress in terms of what the administration is putting together for a strategic plan. And I thought it would be helpful to share this with you all for a few minutes as the board is making its own strategic plan, because I feel like we often as a state, and this isn't unique to Vermont, but there's a million strategic plans. I'm sure a lot of the members of this board have your own strategic plans, whether you're a business or whether you're an organization. And so I just, again, to the extent any of this is useful for you all to see what the administration is looking to do on workforce and other areas that the board is also looking at, I thought it would be helpful for you to see how these things can dovetail, and then you can consider how they connect or don't connect, and we'll go from there. So Abby, thank you for throwing this on the screen. If you want to scroll down, this is just a cover page. Keep going. I'm going to show you guys all in a second what we're measuring. So actually, if you could go back up for a second, Abby, to the vision page. So in terms of what our strategic plan and Governor Scott's administration is orientated around, it's Vermont's economy is growing faster than the cost of living. Our state is measurably more affordable each year for families and businesses, and we are meeting our obligation to protect the most vulnerable. So now, Abby, if you want to scroll down again, we'll talk a little bit about what are we measuring to know if we're succeeding in doing that. The governor's 3 buckets, again, I'm sure many people have heard this before, are grow the economy, make Vermont more affordable, build safe and healthy communities. We were saying a lot, protect the most vulnerable. It's the same, it's similar. We've just rebranded a little bit over the past 6 years. And then a 4th bucket's efficiency and accessibility of government. But we don't, we could lead with that more, but we talk more about the other 3 buckets. So in terms of our strategic outcome to grow the economy, what we are looking at as breakthrough indicators on this page that we are looking to measure are the size of the workforce by county, by race, ethnicity, gender, by age, by sector, and as a percent of population. Again, you'll see the big draft mark. We just had a meeting yesterday about what kind of data is actually doable in those categories that I just went through in terms of limitations of what we currently collect and something that we feel is defensible. So again, I want to underscore it's a draft, but that is ideally what we're looking to capture. And then employer growth by county, by employee count, by sector. Wage growth by county, by race, ethnicity, gender, by age, by sector, and the workforce gap, hence my question to Matt just now about the workforce gap by region and by sector. So if you want to keep scrolling, Abby, our next top line indicators for whether or not we're making Vermont more affordable are the average percent of household income spent on healthcare, housing, including utilities and heat cost, taxes and fees, childcare, transportation, food, and percent annual change in average median income versus consumer price index. If you want to scroll, Abby, thank you. In terms of building safe and healthy communities, the breakthrough indicators, we are looking to measure our percent of population living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level, rate of homelessness and housing stability, percent of population with access to comprehensive health care, so including preventative, primary and mental health, dental, long-term services and supports, substance use disorder treatment and recovery, and public safety index, violent crime rate and recidivism rate. And then we can look at the fourth bucket too, because it might be of interest to some folks here around improving efficiency and accessibility of government. So 3 breakthrough indicators here that we are looking to measure are our employees trained in continuous improvement, number of agencies with customer satisfaction metrics, and our employment engagement and morale scores. So pausing here for a second, besides the fact that you guys are also working on a strategic plan, when the governor's reviewing policy initiatives in our own internal policy development process or bills that are eventually sent to him from the legislature, we are always looking to see how do these things align with what we have set out in our strategic plan. In a second, we'll talk more granularly about some of the strategies that agencies have to impact these measures. But one of the first questions we're asking ourselves is, does this proposal, does this initiative, does this bill do anything to improve any of these outcomes? So hopefully that might demystify a little bit some of our internal machination about how we form policy positions and how the governor forms policy positions on things, but we're always looking to be very tight to how it influences or impacts our strategic plan. So Abby, if you could put up a spreadsheet, what I'm about to show, again, I'm underscoring draft, and there are other cabinet members on this meeting right now with me, Secretary French, Secretary Curley, Commissioner Goldstein, Commissioner Harrington, Deputy Secretary Boucher. So if anyone wants to join in, please feel free to do so. I'm again underscoring draft. Abby, you might need to make this a little bigger. I don't know if it's like teeny tiny for other people, but it's teeny tiny for me. If you could keep zooming.
It's way tiny, Kendall. I support you.
Thank you. I'm not going to be able to work from that. There we go. There is apparently a trick with Teams that I just learned. If anybody's feeling very technologically equipped this morning, which there's a button that says pop out on the top of your control panel to the left. And if you do that, it pops out the content that's being shared. And apparently you can then make it bigger or smaller to meet your own viewing needs. So I'll throw that out for what it's worth for your future Teams meetings, should you have them. But I just learned this trick and I'm actually trying to do it right now. There we go. So what I've pulled out here on this spreadsheet is some of the workforce, either strategies, actions, or measures that are included in the draft. Again, I'm going to keep saying this, draft of our strategic plan at the moment that I said we're working on buttoning up. So we've organized things by grow the economy, make Vermont more affordable, protect the most vulnerable. And I just wanted the board again to see some of the things that we've identified right now in tentative draft format of where the administration might be measuring workforce growth or expansion. So for example, the Agency of Commerce has 3 on here to start. One of their strategies may be, could be, again, working draft, grow Vermont's tax base and receipts through economic expansion and increased employment. And then if you scroll a little bit, Abby, to the right, so we can see the performance measure, one of the things they'd be looking at to see if they're achieving that is the number of recruited remote workers. Some folks in this meeting might be familiar with a program that the Senate actually put forward that we were really enthusiastic about. Senator Clarkson was on that key committee about giving incentives for new and relocated and remote workers. It's evolved a little bit over the years, but it's always oversubscribed. So now, Abby, if you could go a little bit back to the left. Sorry, we're going to be going left, right, so we can get the full screen here. Agency of Commerce, Grow Vermont's workforce. One of the things they'd be looking to do, maybe draft in this space, is doing some enhanced marketing to attract new residents through Think Vermont and administering and improve the new relocated worker program. So again, if you go to the right, I'm sorry for this kind of back and forth dance we're going to be doing. They'll be looking to measure the number of net new employees who utilize the relocated worker program, and then a potential inquiry. I'm focusing on the bolded language here, as folks can see. So Abby, back to the left. I hope this isn't making anyone seasick. People can feel free to chime in. So one of the buckets, right, where are we going to get 16 to 23,000 people? Connecting businesses with individuals who are detached from the workforce. So Vermonters who are already here and could be interested in coming back on a part-time or a full-time basis. Then moving to the Agency of Human Services, one of their strategies that they have laid out, maybe draft, again, working document, is moving more Vermonters who are receiving their services into the workforce. And what they mean specifically is if you go to the right, Abby. Thank you. Looking at their performance measures, again, I'm just focusing on some of the bold pieces here. The number of reach-up caseload that has met or exceeded the federal work participation rate, the number of participants who are unemployed and obtained a job with our micro business development program, the percent of hireability, that was Voc Rehab. They've recently rebranded. I love hireability. I think it's wonderful. New name for that department or division here. Anyway, their consumers will retain employment after receiving services 2 quarters post-exit, and the percent, this is now Department of Mental Health, of working age CRT clients who are employed. If you go back to the left, thank you. The Agency of Human Services also has a huge focus. Folks might recall from the legislative session and when I was going through some of the governor and the legislature's workforce activities, there was a big focus on healthcare, and there's a big need to stabilize the health and human services workforce. So if you go to the right, Abby, I'm sorry, again. So what they will be looking to measure to know if we're doing that or not is our turnover rate by job classification among RNs, COs, mental health specialists, probation officers, primary care provider, FTEs per 100,000 Vermonters, number of unduplicated individuals working in regulated childcare settings, percent of employees who have been employed at the organization for 3 years. We will lay this all out in a final strategic plan so it doesn't look quite so overwhelming and quite so lengthy, but I was trying to figure out how to capture this for this group in a more simplified way. So the Agency of Education, what role does our pre-K through 12 education system play in closing the workforce gap, both in terms of career exploration and CTE and other programs like work-based learning, but also how can we use our education system to attract more families to Vermont? So one of their goals is create a seamless system of education and career pathways to support the development of a 21st century workforce. And then if you were to go to the right, you'd see they're looking at percent of CTE students who complete their programs, percent of CTE students who obtain industry credentials, percent of students participating in CTE programs. I think that is a duplicate. I just read the same thing twice. Sorry about that. Our Agency of Agriculture, throughout their strategic plan, again, this is not the whole administration strategic plan. I'll just pause and say that. I think I said at the beginning, I tried to grab pieces that dealt with workforce. There's a lot in our draft strategic plan about housing, about broadband. This is just a small segment of things we're looking to measure. So the Agency of Agriculture actually has a really strong emphasis on supporting and sustaining the agricultural workforce throughout theirs. But one example that I pulled out to share with you all today is developing programs to support success of next generation of farmers, food and ag biz, targeting annual funding and resources for new and beginning farmers. So they're looking to collaborate with Voc Rehab or Hireability on workforce training and development opportunities, as well as enhancing our support for meat cutter training courses. The next set is from the Department of Labor. So again, I invite any cabinet members that want to weigh in here to please do so. But again, tentative draft goals for all of us in this space: promoting employment, reemployment, upskilling, career advancement through enhanced job placement services, increased training opportunities, and targeted engagement with job seekers. And then again, Abby, if you were to scroll to the right, some of those actions are creating our work-based learning grant program, implementing the regionally based workforce expansion pilots that passed this session, and measuring the amount of job seekers with profiles on JobLink, the percent of JobLink job seekers receiving workforce development support services. And I'm going to just skip down to the end, again, focusing on some of the bold language: average length of time an individual collects UI in weeks. And I know Matt and Commissioner Harrington just spoke about that a little bit in the last presentation, in terms of whether or not you're able to do an average. So again, like I said, very much an active conversation that we're having internally, and you're seeing some of that today. So Abby, if you go back left, VDOL expanding the labor force through more coordination and more partnerships. And so I hope this kind of will tee up Senator Clarkson and Chair Granauld for the next part of the agenda in a second, which is focused on governance work and the study that's happening. So we'll just put a little pin in that maybe this gives you a jumping off point. But if you move to the right, since this is about coordination and partnerships, again, just highlighting some of the bold, you guys can all read the rest of it quietly to yourselves, but I'm going to say they're looking to implement recruitment programs with targeted outreach, and then measuring the number of recruitment initiatives per year, number of out-of-state recent grads of Vermont colleges contacted, percent increase in labor force participation rate, and number of civilians in the labor force. So if you go back left, so another, again, strategy here is retaining prime working age labor force, age 16 to 54. Again, Matt showed our aging population is going up while we don't have younger peoples in the labor force backfilling that, and identifying contributing factors to the population loss. If you go right, I would just highlight the bold under the performance measure, percent of participants receiving retained care coordinated services, percent of participants receiving retained resources, number of individuals in prime working age labor force. Go back left. I'm not going to read through this whole piece, but in the last state workforce development board meeting that I attended this spring, I'm not sure if you guys have had another one in between, well, we were doing some breakout sessions and thinking about what are worker supports, right? So what are the things that people need to be in the labor force, and does the board want to focus on that? Housing, right? Housing always comes up. People who might be interested in taking a job, but then end up turning the job down because they can't find a house in the community or a reasonable commute length that they could live in, which is unfortunate. So I'm not going to read this whole one, but I put it in here as an example to show that there is a lot of housing metrics and strategies in the administration strategic plan in terms of what we'll be measuring to know if we are either increasing or improving existing housing stock. And ACCD tends to be the lead organization with us on that piece. Abby, if you want to keep scrolling, and I also will try to pick up the pace on my time here because I know we're a little over. The next one too, childcare. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you all, but we know housing, childcare, broadband, I said these a few minutes ago, right, are really important things that are going to retain and attract people here. So I put this in as an example that the administration is measuring and is engaged in the childcare conversation and how we can make sure we have the slots to meet the demand at an affordable price. VDOL, again, promoting career advancement and increased earning potential by increasing skill development opportunities. you just want to keep scrolling, Abby, I think the last one is public safety. And similar to the Agency of Human Services, who's looking at the healthcare sector, another area, right? It's everywhere where we're seeing a really big strain in terms of the number of openings to the number of applicants is in law enforcement. So the Department of Public Safety has a strategy and some measures focused around recruiting and training public safety professionals with an emphasis on law enforcement, improving and stabilizing those staffing shortages, doing enhanced recruitment and retention practices, and updating their academy entrance standards. So Abby, you can stop sharing. I just, again, at the risk of repeating myself, thought it would be good to give the board a little flavor of what is in the administration's draft strategic plan right now for you all then to take that information in whatever ways might be helpful to you to think about as you create the board strategic plan. So with that, I think I'll either turn it back to you, Abby, or Adam and Allison, you are next on the agenda to talk about our governance conversation.
Well, you teed us up perfectly, Kendall.
Good.
Because
Yes.
if everyone isn't overwhelmed at the moment by the huge patchwork of
There's a lot.
of workforce development, both needs and opportunities, I'm very impressed by you. But I'm just going to tee up a bit of the history that led us to this moment with the legislation that we're dealing with the Special Oversight Committee. And then Adam is, I think, going to take it and fill in the details that I, at my 30,000 foot view, may have missed. So having served on Senate Economic Development since 2017, I served in the House before that, but I have to say many of us who have served on that committee have been overwhelmed for years of of all the workforce development opportunities, the training opportunities, the needs. And I think one of the things that has impressed us over the years is the need to coordinate it better. So at the moment, the charge for that coordination, which we actually embedded with the Commissioner of Labor, but the Department of Labor is part of our service partners. They are serving this population. In our minds, it is very hard to have the big picture and be at the 30,000 foot level of need of recognizing and coordinating the need in workforce development when you're being a service provider. And so we, after years of being frustrated by the patchwork aspect of what's available in workforce training and development, and there's such fabulous training opportunities in this state, from our incredible career and technical education centers to our own job opportunities and workforce opportunities within state government that are available. It's astonishing, but it is a patchwork, and we have partners that are non-state agencies that are outside of state government. Here's Tom. Tom is here on the call. Hi, Tom Longstretch. It's good to see you. And we have VYCC, we have the Audubon Society, we have the Vermont Business Roundtable. We have partners that need coordination that are outside state government and that are also serving the community, the workforce needs. And we have education. Obviously, we have Dan and Heather on this call, in this meeting. So I think we finally, the question was called this legislative session, and we embedded in our workforce development bill, which, as you know, invests over $84 million in workforce tuition, training, loan forgiveness. It is an astonishing wealth of workforce support. And however, we embedded in it the request for us to actually look at who should best coordinate this work more effectively, because to serve every one of our strategic goals, we need to be able to coordinate it more effectively. I think I heard that word effective and efficient used in the governor's strategic plan several times. So we set up this incredibly long name, the Special Workforce, what is it? The Special Oversight Committee on Workforce. It's got a long acronym. And our job is, I'm going to just read you our charge. Our job is to identify the optimal organizational structure for the Vermont Workforce Development System, under which a single government entity, office, or executive position is charged with the authority and duty to coordinate workforce development efforts across state government in close partnership and coordination with non-governmental partners, and achieve the goals of the state of Vermont strategic plan. And that is what we are working together. We set up a committee of 5 people, very small, we hope very effective. Kendall, Adam, and I serve on it. And I don't know who, and Sarah Buxton, I'm sure, is here, and Michael Marcotte. Those are the 5, and we are, anyone who wants to attend our meetings, we're more than welcome to have you. We've had Ellen Kaler, and we've had Pat Moulton, and we've had Cam has been there, you know, lots of you have been there. But our job is to really figure out how best to create an office that will coordinate this entire system much more effectively than it is at the moment, so that we can really deliver more efficiently the needs of our population from age 0 up. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it to Adam is, I just want to say, this is an example, this committee is an example of how we're a functional legislature working with our administration, because my idea was to set it up. But I came to the administration with this idea. We talked about this, and we talked about it in committee, and we were ready to set up this office. We were ready to finance and set up this office right away. We thought we knew exactly what we wanted. And the administration asked us to do this work first, to really look at it, evaluate it, have a national consultant come in and work with us and design the optimal oversight office and what it would look like. So, you know, there we are, working together to benefit Vermont. So we backed down. We are now working on this, and it's delayed a little bit, but we will hope that we come up with a great solution. And Adam, you want to add? I may have missed some things.
No, thank you very much, Senator Clarkson. So I think for everyone, because this is important, the acronym, we in Workforce and Economic Development love those acronyms. So it's
it's so long.
Special Oversight Committee on Workforce Expansion and Development. So SOCWED, we are. So, you know, for me, what's so important about this task at hand is to find a way that works for a small state, a rural state. You know, when I go to national conferences for economic development or workforce, and they say, all right, all the rural people go over there. The rural people go over there, and sure, they may be from a small community, but they're within 15 miles of a metro, 250,000 person population. So it is not truly rural. And to find solutions for workforce development in a state that doesn't have a bunch of similar widget makers where we can all just create more similar widget maker skills, we really have to find ways to bring all the different parties that Senator Clarkson just referenced, both the agencies and departments, but the other participants in the workforce system, right from our middle schools up through high schools, CTEs, our state college system, as well as all of the folks out there working in economic and workforce development. It is so often a local, regional need. So we need to find ways that share information up and down, create those best practices and networks, all within this system. And as Senator Clarkson shared that charge, that is what we're looking to do. So how do we do it? Are we creating this all on our own? We think maybe there's some ideas out there around the country, and that's what this RFP that maybe Abby can put a link to in the chat so folks can go look at that in more detail. I don't want to spend our time here today reading this to you, but look at the RFP so you can understand what it is we're looking for from this contract. But I will just read one section here. Specifically, the contract will review comparable state and municipal structures and provide a risks and benefits analysis on how each state's organizational structure impacts the delivery of services program performances, effectiveness in adopting, aligning, and coordinating statewide public policy changes, supports accountability and governance, and meets state identified policy outcomes. The contractor shall provide at least 3 organizational structure scenarios that are demographically and geographically like Vermont for the SOCWED to consider for reorganization of the state's workforce systems. These models must address intergovernmental communications and management, the relationship of state government with external partners, and the ability to adapt and to address evolving state workforce needs. So, there's a lot more detail in it than that, but high view, that's what we're asking folks to come back with and help us learn what else is being done around the country. We have some timelines. So originally, we may have thought this could be done over the summer and into the fall. Very quickly, everyone recognized, of course, that the task at hand could not be done in a matter of months. So the timeline now reflects a longer period. And so we have now the proposals for this RFP are due October 21st, with a contract beginning shortly thereafter. And then phased reporting through February and April of 2023, with the phase 2 due July of 23. So here we are, planning to not have at the earliest the results of this until well into next summer. So we can see that this is a long-term planning exercise. But the good news is, along the way, we're learning. It's not like we have to wait until July to get even the smallest of answers. We'll be getting these along the way. We'll start hearing about what other states are doing. We can start exploring that on our own, sharing those ideas with others, so that by July we'll be moving forward. I will also say that we've been advised that it's not just in Vermont employment world that there's a tight labor force. There is also a tight labor force in national expertise in consulting and contracting, such as we're asking for. So we could too face some delays, not without a heavy dose of irony. So I see we have a question. I can't see who it's from though. Who's that? I see one hand up without a name. I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. Tom.
Hi there. Is my mic working?
It is.
Okay. My question, I think coordination is important, but I just want to make one piece clear, because I think the workforce development arena operates much like the rest of the free market in terms of training programs, working with providers to deliver what's needed to workers and employers. So in terms of coordination, I think what's most important is, rather than some sort of command and control function, which would be really unrealistic for any state agency to take on, I hope by coordination we're thinking of it as, how can we make sure that funding flows efficiently to where it's most needed? Because there's a public good here, we're often dealing with public money, whether that's private or public, that are supporting often low-income people who need skills. And workers benefit from it, but because they can't hold on to those employees, there's some benefit to providing this as public funding. And so I think that the key questions in terms of coordination in my mind are, how do we make sure that there's accountability in terms of funding being used effectively, producing really strong, high impact, and also make sure that there's not a whole lot of redundancy and duplication, and that where there's critical needs, that we make sure that there's evolving, that funding quickly flows towards that, and workforce training develops towards that. So anyway, I just, the coordination issue, I really don't want us to get into a place where we are commanding and controlling and saying, yep, these are the this is the direction, because I think any state agency is going to struggle to do that. But if coordination means make sure our funding is effective and that it flows where it's most needed, that's absolutely a huge need.
Tom,
Matt,
I'll let
Matt?
others. Oh, go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
may I just say, sorry, Tom, I assumed that in our desire to see, for us, that's implied. For us, it is about accountability. For us, it is about reducing redundancy so that we aren't funding two groups that are doing the same thing. We also need a better accountability and aggregating the accountability so that we can see what we're accomplishing across all these different groups that are delivering them, so that we can, so yes, absolutely, addressing both accountability and reducing redundancy and duplication. I mean, to me, those are essential.
And
Yeah,
it
and I'll
is-
just add, having two groups.
And coordinating the funding.
Yeah, having two groups delivering almost the same type of thing, but one potentially doing it slightly better, that's part of the free market, and, efficiency, can be gained by, that people, workforce, it's not all equal. And so I think having a little bit of competition is probably healthy, and not having only one provider providing one way of training. Some level of overlap might be a good thing.
Yeah, Tom, I think two things here is the RFP does go into more detail on that. So to your concerns that you've raised, yes, the RFP addresses accountability, performance. There's a lot of details in there for that. More larger picture sort of outcome and what we'll be doing. Personally, I completely agree. I think, this is a rural system that is functioning, is going to leverage all of those assets, public and private. Not have that command and control, but instead, ultimately be seen as the center, the resource for everyone involved in workforce development to collaborate with. And right now, I would suggest that we don't have that in the state. We don't have a single place where everyone says, oh, go ask, or go see, or partner with. And instead it's spread across a bunch of very talented entities. And personally, it's my hope that this oversight governance work helps create the situation in which that can grow. Any other questions? Okay, before I turn this back over to Abby, or maybe Abby, you can help do this. I understand that I passed over the approval of the minutes. So if we could do that. So Abby, if I'll turn that over to you, and then to follow up with the strategic plan update.
Right. So did everyone receive the minutes that I had sent out prior? Great. Does anyone want to make a movement to approve of the minutes?
I can make a motion. This is Sophie.
Great. And second?
Seconded,
I'll
Brian
second.
Carpenter.
Great. All right. So now that that is taken care of, for the second part of this meeting, we are going to be discussing the board strategic plan and picking up where we left off from our previous meeting back in May. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Hey, Abby,
Yes.
just before we go, did you want a roll call vote, just a general vote? How do you want to approve those?
Oh,
minutes?
yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Are we just, are we doing what process would you like for that? I think what we could do is call for a vote, and then I'll look for abstentions and nay votes. How's
Okay,
that?
yes.
All right,
All
so
right, so-
we've had a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. That motion is passed. Minutes are approved.
Great. All right, is everyone able to see my screen? Okay.
Not
perfect.
yet.
So,
Are you
no, you're
sharing
not.
screen at the moment?
Yes, I am.
I can see your screen.
Okay.
Okay, I can't, but that's okay because I tried Kendall's pop out and then popped out. I got it. But then when I came back, I'm now not able to see the screen. I wasn't able to see her screen or your screen now, which is interesting.
Okay, well, I'll be speaking about most of the things on the slides and I'll send it to you afterwards.
Oh, right. If
but-
you'd send both, that would be terrific. So
Yes.
I can't recover a screen
I can
share.
do that. Okay, I can do that. So again, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I know that the board has gone under some transition since the last time we saw all of you in May, but my name is Abby Rim, and I am the current acting executive director of the Vermont State Workforce Development Board. Obviously, since the last time we saw you, we have gone from a 2-member staff to a 1-person staff. We're hoping that Tori will be returning with us later on, but at the moment, it's just me. And I know that we do have some newcomers with us, so just wanting to ground you all in the board's charge moving forward with the strategic plan in mind. And this was taken from the board bylaws, but it does say that the board advises the governor on the development and implementation of a comprehensive, coordinated, and responsive statewide workforce education and training system. So just for folks to be aware, we do have those board bylaws. We also have our state statute, and then we have our federal charge, which is WIOA. And within that, we do have various goals and plans stated in those bylaws, the state statute and the federal charge. However, related to the board, the language is fairly vague. We have a lot of general goals, but we don't have actionable items or performance metrics. Specifically within the WIOA state plan, there are several sections that mention the State Workforce Development Board, but again, it's more vague statements saying that the board will support career pathways or better connect with employers, but we don't necessarily have metrics lined up saying that how we are going to go about accomplishing those goals. So with the strategic plan that we rolled out back in May with the NGA, it's the hope that with our general ideas of convening and conducting and connecting as a workforce development board, we then go in more granular detail and identify certain strategies that we want to focus on in the next year or two while all this governance is going on, while all this other work is happening within workforce development to really get some wins of the board under the belt so that we can all reference the board and look at actionable items that we have accomplished in the next year or two. So that is what the goal is with our strategic plan. While we obviously have these other strategic plans with different organizations, we have the WIOA state plan, but there is a missing piece here of identifying performance metrics within the board that I think everyone is looking for that direction from the board members and with the board staff. So that being said, the documents that I sent out to you all before this meeting today was the strategies and benchmarks that we are going to be looking at as a board. We discussed these themes at the last board meeting, which was aligning the workforce system, increase and enhance workforce supports, coordinating workforce education and training, and then facilitating relocation and recruitment. And then there was a 5th item added on that was just general WIOA compliance. So we are going to be looking at those goals, and then under those, we have the benchmarks and performance metrics that the board itself is going to be held accountable and referencing other state agencies and community partners to coordinate and collaborate on these efforts. So I just want to stress that, again, echoing Kendall, this is a draft that I sent out to you all. It is not the final strategic plan. We are not voting on anything today, and it is also only a portion of the strategic plan. So my hopes today after this conversation is that we have a better sense of where the board wants to go with the proposed strategies and performance metrics that you all have now seen and reviewed that we're going to be discussing today, but also hoping that realistically we're going to be trimming down the document that I sent to you all because as everyone knows, this is a volunteer board, so we can only expect so much of your time. And then the staff of the board is currently 1 person, hopefully 2 in the future, but wanting to trim down that document some. So once we do that, we are hoping that there will be breakdown sections within the strategic plan. So if we have a goal that we have and we have the strategies and benchmarks, ideally each portion of the strategic plan has a 1-pager that really flushes out the details of how we're going to be accomplishing that goal with the timeline and dates and certain partners that we're going to be working with and agencies. So again, this is, even though the document that I sent you is a few pages long, we are hoping to go more in depth on a few of the provided elements that I've given to you. So again, just going back to the timeline, I know obviously that at our last meeting, we had discussed approving the plan by the end of the year. And I think to begin with, that was an ambitious goal, but especially down a staff member, it's not really feasible. And wanting to get this right, obviously, and taking more time to have everyone be involved and get input is important. So we've already gone through phase 1, May through September. We had our second quarterly board meeting. The operating committee has met in between then, and I've met with a number of you individually to get your feedback on these strategies and benchmarks. We're obviously meeting today and hoping to gather some feedback from you all. And in between now and December, having another operating committee meeting to really fine tune some of the strategies that we're going to be accomplishing. And then hopefully having another board meeting towards the end of December. And my goal is to have a few of the strategies actually ironed out to give you all examples of what those more in-depth one-pagers are going to look like. So making some progress there. And then in the new year up until March, having a few more operating committee meetings to review the plan, and then hopefully a new deadline of the end of March with the final plan for all of us to approve. So that's the new timeline that we're looking at, but again, flexible depending on staffing situations and the level of engagement that I receive from all of you. So that's where we're at for right now. So now we are going to go into our breakout session portion of the meeting. You all should have received the materials to review prior to this. And so we're going to be going into 5 different breakout groups of about 10 to 12 people. And this is going to be an opportunity for you to provide feedback to the facilitators in each group on thoughts on the plan. So I've provided 5 questions, but given the time that we have, it's completely okay if you all don't get to that. It would rather be quality over quantity here. So the 2 top ones that should be the main priorities. The first one is reviewing whether or not you think that the materials provided, if this is the right scope of the board and the direction that we're heading. And then the second one is within the categories and the strategies that are provided. Are there any there that you think this is a #1 priority? It absolutely should be here. It should not go anywhere. We should be focusing on this, or, you know, we're focusing on the next year or 2 of the board and this is not a priority, or this organization is already doing that. So how do we get the board to support those efforts and not duplicate efforts? So it's an opportunity for you to go through and point out certain strategies and decide this is not what the board wants to focus on right now. We should get rid of this, or someone else is already doing this. So we definitely need that feedback. I will say I'm going to be sending out a survey afterwards for you all to provide more of this feedback, because obviously we're not going to have time to go through every single bullet point. So I'm definitely going to be looking for engagement with that survey, and then also having one-on-one meetings with you all to review moving forward. So if anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I will go ahead and send us into our breakout sessions for all of us to review the materials, and then we'll reconvene for about 15 minutes to discuss what you all talked about, and that'll be the rest of the meeting. Does anyone have any questions before we do that? I can also go ahead and put the document that I sent out into the chat, just so that folks have it. If they don't have it at the top of their inbox, again, I'm happy to do that. But if not, I will go ahead and put us in our breakout sessions and we will go from there. All right, so a few of you are not going anywhere because you're staying in my facilitation group. Hopefully everyone else went to their breakout session, and if not, we've lost them to the void. So I'm not sure if we want to just quickly go around and give introductions, since I know we do have a few guests in attendance, a few new members. I will say we don't have a ton of time, so if we just want to leave it to your name and the organization that you work with, and then we'll go from there and dive right in. So if you want to introduce yourself and then select the next person to go, that would be great. So again, my name is Abby Rim. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the Vermont State Workforce Development Board. Pat, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Pat Elmer with Associates for Training and Development. Our acronym is A4TD, in case you see it. We specialize in training and employment for mature workers. And How about Michael Stack?
I think you're muted, Michael.
Michael, you're definitely muted.
Yeah, we can't hear you at the moment.
How's that better?
Yes, there you go.
Okay. Mike Stack, I started just recently retired from the investment industry. Started a nonprofit in the Bells Falls area, Bells Falls Trades. Basically, I partnered with the Bells Falls High School to help them support work-based learning, integrating in with some of the tech centers, which I agree with comments from Senator Clarkson, unbelievable asset in the state and totally underutilized. So that's my 2 cents.
Tom, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Tom Longstreth, Executive Director of Resource. We do job training and poverty relief and environmental work. And Rich Tulikangas, go ahead.
Greetings, Rich Tulikangas. I am the Career Advancement Director for Hireability Vermont. And I'll go with Emily.
Emily, I don't think we can hear you.
Emily, you're muted.
Or it doesn't say you're muted, but we can't.
It's my,
There you go.
I think it's my headphones. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Emily Wagner, I work at CCV. I'm the new Vermont Career Advancement Program Manager. I'll pass it to Corey.
Good morning. Thanks, Emily. Corey Matthew, new member of the board, first meeting. I am a member of the remote workforce, now living in Vermont. Quick history, grew up here, went to high school here, moved away for 5 to 10 years, relocated back to Vermont as part of the remote workforce, and here indefinitely starting a family. So happy to join. Thanks, guys. Stephen?
Hi, I'm Stephen Dellinger Pate. I'm the principal at U32, which is located surrounding Montpelier, and happy to be a part of this board for a while now. Let's see Brian, you're in there.
Good morning, Brian Carpenter. I'm president of Champlain Valley Equipment. We're a farm and industrial equipment dealer, and so an employer here in the state. Go with Thomas.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Cheney, and I'm the Executive Director of Advanced Vermont, and we're an organization trying to help increase attainment in the state to support our economy, communities, and individuals. So great to be here. And I think Allison's the last one. And we know who Allison is.
I'm here. Allison Clarkson, Senator, Windsor County District, a majority leader in the Senate, Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and on government operations. And is there somebody, oh, I have to put my glasses on.
Is anyone not introduce themselves?
I think it's yours, Abby. Take her away.
Great. So we are just going to start with the facilitator questions. And so as I had mentioned, the point of this conversation, we don't need to go specifically by the questions, but really identifying with those strategies and benchmarks that I lined out for all of you all is just getting a sense of, is this the role of the board? Do you all feel like this is the right scope of the board, that we're moving in the right direction with identifying these goals that we want to be trying to meet in the next year or two? So really looking for general feedback on initial reactions to that plan. And if you feel like the space that we're entering is appropriate for the board, if it's manageable for the board. And then obviously you're more than welcome to also say if there are any priorities that you really agree with, that you really don't agree with, anything that feels like we're totally missing the mark or missing in the plan, but I will leave it open for you all.
Abby, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My only comment, and I'm new to the board within the last year or so, is, and I think I sensed this when Tom spoke, less study, less discussion, more do. So I'm in the camp of breaking things down into manageable chunks, assigning people responsibility and getting on with it. And so that's my only 2 cents is I'd like to start to see some action and less discussion. Maybe it's a function of the board's too large. I'm not sure. And I'd be happy to step down if you know, if you need fewer people involved, but I'm for let's get some things done and stop studying so much.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that with the strategic plan, that's one of the goals that I'm having is while this S11, the committee is meeting and having this overall governance structure conversation, we still want the board to be having success and building legitimacy. So while that conversation is going on, what is the board doing in the next year or two to build legitimacy and look at some actionable items and say, this is what we accomplished in the last year or two while this governance conversation is going on. Tom?
I think I'm unmuted. In terms of some of the benchmark, I mean, some of the indicators and the benchmarks look like they're sort of process oriented, and I'd love to see more outcome oriented. You know, what do we really care about? And I think the things we care about is, you know, when someone, you know, higher ed, you know, when they go to higher ed, are they getting really good jobs? Do they have strong job results? Is there a good return on investment for the money they're spending? If it's you know, workforce training programs, if someone goes through the training program, you know, can we look at what their earnings were in the 2 years prior to that investment, compare that to the 2 or 5 years after investment? Those sort of numbers, I think, are relatively easy for the state to obtain. They're pretty hard for each individual agency to obtain. And so, you know, I've long talked and suggested that the state, and, you know, I think Department of Labor is a natural fit here, coordinate with the tax department and try to obtain and give back information to each agency that's providing education or training to evaluate their performance. And that then there's some accountability associated with that would direct some funding towards them or away from them, or just help them improve. I mean, part of this is just to help us be the best we possibly can. So I just, you know, I think the other piece of this is some jobs, the state should be prioritizing some jobs over other jobs. For example, I think the lack of construction workers who are here and able to build housing for our citizens is a really high need. Nursing, the lack of nurses is a high need. The lack of educators in our public schools is a huge need. You know, maybe we can get by with fewer retail workers if that means that those retail workers are only going to be open 5 days a week, they're not going to be open 7 days a week. You know, in my book, that's probably a good thing. You know, that, you know, there's, you know, we don't need to shop 24/7. So I just think that the board should be prioritizing some of these jobs that we care most about and make sure that those that we're investing and directing funding towards those jobs, and maybe some others we worry less about.
And do you have an idea of how we would select those? Because I feel like we probably all have different benchmarks of what we value in a job. So I do see that being an issue.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, but I think that's where the board could come in. I mean, we're a big board representing a lot of different sectors. And I think that if we manage to come up with some, you know, maybe it's tiers, right? You know, we're going to say, here's a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And, you know, if you're in tier 1 or 2, you know, the state cares about that. We want to invest in funding, but maybe tier 3, we just, you know, that's a little bit lower priority, and that doesn't trigger certain types of funding. I mean, so that, you know, so public funding to provide, to push people into or help people move into certain careers maybe that wouldn't be available. And I think that's a reasonable thing for this board to do as a group, is to sort of, and then maybe it gets, the board would make a recommendation that the legislature would approve.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other thoughts or comments?
That's Brian. I have maybe a follow on to Tom. When you look at the criteria, we've talked about the trades in prior meetings and supporting some growth in the trades. And when you look at some of them, like he was talking about construction workers, but you really got to throw in the plumbers, the electricians, all of those trades. But they facilitate our ability to grow the workforce. And so, and then you talk about nursing and healthcare. That's the quality of life that brings people to Vermont, and then having affordable and dependable healthcare. So you could potentially have some criteria that you judged jobs on their support and whether they had a second tier effect on the growth of or ability to grow our job market and recruit and retain. The other comment that I had was looking through our strategic plan. I think all of those are legitimate requirements for us to be successful. I had not really seen our charter before. I'm relatively new. And when you flashed it up, it's kind of limited, the charter is. And so if we see these as our requirements to perform, I almost need to circle back and amend the charter to include things like the recruitment and retention, because it's really, the charter's focused on training. And I think that drives then the board makeup and what we value and where we actually, if we have had some funding, would recommend directing that funding. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I will say, Brian, that with the charge of the board, that's the mission that we have in the bylaws. However, within the state statute and the federal statute, it goes on forever. I definitely could not summarize it so I think you could arguably say that the board could have involvement in every corner of the workforce system. So they definitely, all the things that are listed here, I would say, are well within the board's charge. But that was just a very, very high over level view of what the board is capable of doing. But there are many other bullet points that I would say these other things can fall within under the board's purview. So anyone else? Any other thoughts or comments?
Abby, I just would chime in again. To me, I think that, and maybe this is what will come out of Allison's efforts, not that we're going to be a employment agency, but Matt had statistics regarding job openings. So you have data in terms of what industries need jobs, and that may be a cyclical piece of the puzzle. And focusing in and breaking that down, you'd see if it's construction or whatever it is. But then we have the secular piece, which is the demographic piece, and that's the healthcare, and that's maybe a longer term piece. But to me, again, just trying to get very action oriented. I think focusing that way, both on the cyclical, which sometimes can be up and down. Maybe construction isn't so necessary in 2 years from now or whatever, but if we could get more operationally focused on what's going on now, but also what's going on longer term. I mean, that's why I've gotten involved with the work-based education, because only 70% of the kids that graduate from at least the Rockingham school district 4 years out end up with a college education. So 70% of the kids really are not being taught to. So I'd say, focus on real practical solutions, and, maybe it's going to morph over time, but, get into it, hand-to-hand combat, whatever you want to say right now. And that would be one way to kind of break it down into its component pieces, kind of the short term, the cyclical, the job openings piece, but then the longer term, the demographics, which is a very, big issue and focuses on healthcare, et cetera.
Michael, thank you for that. I have to say that sadly, when I asked the question about those job openings, Matt isn't able to tell us what sectors they're in, which is one of our frustrations. I think, to go to Tom's point, our outcomes are essential for the legislature, which is a citizen legislature. This is not a bunch of people who full-time do this work. For them to be able to funnel more funding into this kind of work, we need to see what we're getting for our dollars. And we don't really have that picture together in any kind of organized, we have it a little bit, but it's pretty scattershot. So we definitely, there's so many opportunities here, and I think it needs, so we definitely need to focus on our outcomes and identify, I think, prioritizing every year job areas for investment, further investment. But to go to Abby's point, everybody has a different idea of what those job priorities are. I mean, we know we have 1,000 school openings. We know we have openings in our lodging, restaurant, tourism sector. We know that the same in creative sector. They're everywhere, and construction, obviously. So, but we don't have any person or group creating that picture for us and selling us on the need for further investment in X area or in Y area. And so this is, outcomes is a big piece, and we're yeah, that's what we're trying to get a better handle on.
And I think also in the time being, there's some strategies and benchmarks within this of things that the board is going to do and the board staff is going to do, but then there's also some of requesting things from folks to have that better picture, because I feel like the same issue that the legislature is having of not really having that bigger picture, something that the board doesn't necessarily have. Obviously, we have ideas of what's going on in our own siloed areas, but I think also trying to find methods for the board staff to wrangle some of this information to then report back to you all is going to also be helpful. So it's something that I think as a staff, we're looking to give you all more information, but also obviously there's a greater need, as Senator Clarkson is mentioning. So we're just about out of time. Is there anyone else that has any final comments, concerns, questions, remarks before I call the rest of the group in for our final discussion?
You've done a good job.
Yeah, I think this hits all the areas that need to happen: the coordination, the integration, the increase in the supports. I mean, I think it's the alignment. I think you've hit on a lot of the key needs. But filling it out for action is, I think, where we're all focused.
Right. Yes, and I think we're hoping that once we identify, I think we need to trim it down a little bit so that it's more obtainable, and then flushing out those actionable steps that you're all asking for is the next step with the one pager. So Pat,
outcomes. That's our takeaway.
Yes, and outcomes. Pat, did you have something before I call everyone back?
I was just going to say, of the four categories, when I see the recruitment, the relocation and recruitment, I'm always pleased to hear that we're not only looking at new workers, that we're also looking at current Vermonters. We know the demographics. People are working longer for lots of reasons, and they want to do different things. So they too need retraining. I know friends who have been in world business, and they've retrained in healthcare because at this point in their career, they were also in finance. At this point in their career, they wanted to give back. So we need to be thinking about education training throughout the lifespan. And I think you've got it in several places here. And just remember technology. As we get older, we need to have technology resource training for people. Once you leave the workforce, if you want to come back in, you need somebody to help refresh your technology skills. Because if you've been out even 6 months, things have changed. So technology training, a statewide network for technology training throughout the lifespan would be fabulous.
Definitely. And that is actually one statement that is spoken to in the role of the board within the WEO estate plan. But again, it's something that it's not happening right now. So we need to be aware of it and elevate it and make sure that it's written on paper, but then where's the accountability of it? That's something that the board is technically supposed to be doing and we're not. So, but great. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and call everyone else back in just so that we can have a group discussion and wrap everything up. So if you were in the main room, so they'll all come back and we'll just give it a minute or two.
Like that we can actually say.
Oh.
Oh boy.
Deliver these things.
Oh, we're done?
Oh, they pushed us out.
Okay.
Yeah, there was no warning like there usually
I was
is.
like, oh, Heather's left us.
Sorry, I thought it was normally set up that it gives you a 1 or 2 minute warning, but I guess that did not happen.
We were busy talking.
We'll give it a few more minutes for folks to come in. It looks like it's still working to bring people back. And some folks might have also dropped off with the breakout sessions because it does look like we have a smaller number of people. But do we have Kendall? You're here. Dustin, is the commissioner here?
I'm here. Well, it depends on which commissioner, but
Or sorry, Commissioner Harrington. And let's see. Do we have the NGA folks? Jack and Sophie, are you back in the room?
Yep, we're here, Abby.
Okay, great. So I think people just might have dropped off after breakout sessions, but and then Adam, are you here?
I am.
Okay, great. All right, so we obviously don't have time to go through over all the questions, but just from a high level overview from the various groups, just looking at the first question in regards to if this is the right scope of the board and why. Is there anyone, not every group has to speak if you all don't have anything that you want to share, but do we have any feedback on that first question? Commissioner Harrington?
I can just speak for the group that came together. We only went through the first 2 priority questions with some additional comment. I think everybody agreed that those were really good main points or strategies to have. The question became the amount of either the type of work or the amount of work under each of those. So they thought they were good focuses for the board to have, but again, the question became capacity of the board to actually do work. And so I think it was just more about a question of when we're talking about what are the actual activities that the board will do under those 5 strategies, making sure it's doable with a staff of 2 people, or in this case, just 1 right now, and a board of 50 people. So, but the themes were the right themes.
Definitely. And again, I think I'm going to be looking from input from all of you on which of those priorities you feel like we really want to focus on. And that doesn't mean that down the road, we're not going to focus on them. But right now in this 1 to 2 year time frame, what are the things that we really want to accomplish? So looking from feedback from all of you on that. Kendall?
Our group had similar feedback to Commissioner Harrington's. So I just wanted to second what he said, that liked the focus, but questioned if it was too ambitious and the scope of the strategic plan compared to the fact that the board's a volunteer board, and the state employees do this and more. And so maybe to your point about prioritization, some prioritization was needed, sorting for the more complex work versus the low-hanging fruit, or putting this into kind of more granular bite-sized pieces might be something you consider.
Definitely. Dustin?
Sure. Similar feedback on the size of the bucket and what's in the bucket. But also we only talked about the first question because we actually had a nice little conversation, and I don't want to put Michael Keogh on the spot, but we talked about what alignment means. What are we aligning with, right? Are we aligning with the supply side or the demand side, and maybe having a better understanding of what that alignment looks like, and how we define that. Mike, if you want to chime in, that's great. Otherwise, I'm happy leaving the feedback there.
Yeah, no, I just think, the bigger question is how do we more thoughtfully engage businesses in this process and help, especially our smaller businesses, which make up a large percentage of employment in Vermont, engage in this work and change and adopt some of these new practices.
Definitely. And I think also being considerate of obviously business owners' times and not making sure that we're coordinated, and the outreach and the ask from them is really important as well. I think I see a hand, but I'm not sure.
That's my hand. So our group, I think, had similar concerns about the amount of work under what would be considered board purview, and how much of this is board versus system, and what responsibilities does the board itself have in this document versus the document sharing. And I think the consensus was the document has all the right things in it. Maybe there's some things missing, but everything there is good and right. It's just a question of whether that's a function of the board, staff, or others outside of an org chart that can't be affected. So I think we spent a lot of time on that sort of question. Did get through some others as well.
Great.
I do think that's a really good point, and I saw Ellen's comment in the chat too, because I think the other question, this is the board's strategic plan. It's not the board's strategic plan for state government. And so I think it also then, if the idea is that some of these strategies and themes do end up becoming a focus for individual agencies and departments, then those agencies and departments need to be building that into their strategic plans, which they already may have created, or maybe part of the governor's, the statewide strategic plan. Again, so I think it's really needing a clear identifier of is this the strategic plan for the board for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or is this a strategic plan that's meant to direct the work of individual state agencies and departments?
Anyone else? Any other comments? With the second question, were there any categories or elements of this that you feel like were absolutely out of line, or anything that we're missing that you feel like the board really should be focusing on? Commissioner Harrington.
So we did I think that the people in our group obviously highlighted just the priority based on the current need of employers right now, and also job seekers, but really the relocation and recruitment and the education and training. But I think there was a conversation about which comes first, the chicken or the egg, as it relates to, we want to recruit more workers, but do we have places for them to live? And that's a conversation that comes up time and time again, because there are a number of employers that have tried to recruit folks just to have those employees, bail at the last minute because they can't find housing in the right location or where they want to be. So that was a those were the priorities. Education and training was a priority, both for employers, but also job seekers. The other piece that came up that wasn't necessarily on the list, but someone made the comment of recognizing the fact that they use the analogy, putting your own oxygen mask on first before you put the oxygen mask on of the person sitting next to you on the plane. And so the fact is that we have all these training providers and we have all these community partners and state agencies and departments that are working on Workforce 2, but they're all trying to staff up or can't fill positions. And so, again, if they're the ones who are supposed to be providing the necessary resources and support services, how do we make sure they have the capacity to meet the needs of both job seekers and employers?
Kendall?
Thanks. So in terms of what was missing, I don't know if this would be categorized as missing, but there was some conversation about regional approaches and recognizing within the plan somehow the need for regional and local approaches to some of these issues. So I'm not sure how you might go about incorporating that, but that was a big emphasis of our conversation, as well as the need to look at strengths of different demographic groups within the workforce or the labor force, such as making sure older Vermonters are able to remain engaged and employed should they want to be, for example. And I'm sorry if I missed this, the first half of the question and the conversation there, but I'd just add in terms of what did our group see as top priorities, the importance of some of those workforce supports like housing and childcare and affordability, because sometimes while those things might not be traditional workforce development policy, they really are what is driving people to either move here or our ability to retain people.
Definitely. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. I just want to be aware of everyone's time today. Are there any other last minute thoughts or closing comments or anything before we end for the day? No? Okay. And as far as next steps go, I'm going to be sending out a survey for you all to just provide some more feedback on the document that I sent out to you all, and then also reaching out in regards to individual meetings to get more feedback on the draft. So look for that from me. And again, then hoping that we will have another board meeting before the end of the year, so sometime in December. So we'll identify that date shortly. That way you all can get it on your calendars. Adam, I can hand it over to you then to wrap up if you'd like.
No, I think you set it up very well. So we would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And I've got a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And a second. Great. So I'll declare us adjourned, and we'll see you in a couple months.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.